Today, we're delighted to have with us Mary Hatch. Mary, as many of you know, is a longtime Kalamazoo painter. And even though we think of her as local and kind of treasure her as such, she has exhibited widely. In her 40-odd-year career, she has had over 31 person shows around the country, and her work is also in more than 300 private and public collections. So her work is out there. I think it goes without saying that Mary's best known for her really wonderfully unique and distinctive paintings that I guess right away you can say are characterized. The first thing you see is the vibrant colors and patterns that she uses as kind of an environment for her figures, which are the real focus of her work. And it's of course interesting, these people are all types that we really kind of recognize. They're very contemporary. They tend to be sort of vaguely middle-age-ish. They're usually fashionably yet casually dressed. And they seem to be very active and engaged with one another and their environment. Yet what I think makes Mary's work so interesting is the more you look at it, the more you begin to see interesting or unexpected things happening. As you look at the figures and what's going on, you think, well, what exactly is taking place and where exactly is this? Because sometimes the environment is ambiguous. And then you also get the feeling that there's something maybe not said or something that has been said just a moment before, and these figures are kind of reacting to it in their own sort of personal way. So there's this sense that even though there's a very kind of a bright, engaging quality to what's going on, there's also this interesting sort of introspective, solitary aspects to the figures that I think really adds a dimension to the work. And as you'll see, a lot of times very ordinary objects that we're all familiar with suddenly appear in unexpected places, such as umbrellas, which can kind of carry all sorts of other overtones. And the natural question is, I guess, where does this all come from? And that's really going to be the question that Mary is going to be addressing today, talking about how she develops her work, where she gets her ideas and influences. And again, we're delighted to have her with us. So please welcome Mary Hatch.
So we need the lights down?
Yeah, I'll get this.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, first I would like to thank Donna Lambert for bringing in the Alice view, her painting. Thank you very much. It's nice to see one of the real paintings, which I'll be talking about later. Paul Cézanne, reputed to be the father of modern art, believed the source of his creativity came from within by way of his senses, his inner self and his unconscious mind. Sackle makes a compelling case in his book, Cubism, Cognitive Visual Creativity, that scientific studies show our unconscious mind as the source of our creative ideas and not that elusive muse of historic renown. Planning, executing, simply leave you until your mind decides to cooperate and not give in to, this is a really stupid idea. Just keep going and see what happens. It's fun painting. Now, what about this question, what does a painting mean? Not a problem until it is. And my big discovery was being able to travel back to the meaning behind a painting and access this mysterious inner world that arrives without words. Or let's just say, panic set in when I realized publishing ARTbeak with poet Elizabeth Kurlikowski involved readings. Book. Oh no, what do I do now? Surprisingly enough, using my words provided the answer. Thinking back to art history classes, like is the woman in the painting wearing a white sweater and resolutely covering her red blouse. Anecdote. Too many hats, and is 28 by 89, and is part of the To answer the question about her white sweater's absent of any color implies to me a lack of emotion in contrast to the red blouse it covers, which suggests an inability to access the strong feelings absolutely necessary to create art, and accounts for the unsettling atmosphere of the painting. Hats emerged during the painting process, as it often does. It's a popular saying, and we all know what it means: overwhelmed, too many obligations. I had too many. Top, which occasionally experience. I think I'm doing this wrong. There. Thank you. This painting is titled 12 Hats were sitting on top of a mannequin, turned into a real head for painting. And the top hat was just imagined, the light of her skin. Review, New York publication, included an article about my work by Paula Erberu, as well as the cover art. Dr. Erberu made this observation about my work. She plays with the distinction between the probable and the possible, creating works that are disturbing because they have a power through both the use of vibrant color and the unsettling placement of figures. To touch that part in us Okay, thank you. This painting is titled The Lady in Blue, and it is 42 inches by 36, painted in 1978. Carrying on with the New York City was my friendship with the great and wonderful Alice Neal, thanks to the KIA. And while she was here, I showed her this painting. One of her comments was, "Do you always make your thumbs so short?" Very Alice. Well, I'm not sure about that, but I do remember my paintings at this time were about motion and strongly influenced by the work of Harvey Breverman, an amazing artist who was working this way and who gave a number of workshops here. I was also fascinated by the afternoon sun as reflected light from my backgrounds. I became acquainted with Alice when the Art League, knowing how much I loved her work, asked me to contact her about giving a lecture here, which was a huge success. She told very funny and naughty stories about her subjects. And on the naughty side, Alice was not prepared to attend the lecture after party and talked my husband and me into taking her out to dinner instead. What could we do? She was Alice Neal, who marched up to the hotel desk after she arrived and announced, "I'm Alice Neal, and I'm a famous New York artist." And she later invited us to her 80th birthday party in New York. And this is a picture of Alice with her daughter-in-law, Nancy. Alice's birthday party was held in an apartment owned by Stuart Mott, one of her son's friends. Nancy greeted us when we first arrived, and she said the boys, Alice's sons, kept trying to put this painting in a closet. Alice managed to raise and educate two boys with almost no money. One became a lawyer, the other a doctor. Alice has been on my mind lately because she recently had a large retrospective at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It's a shame she wasn't here to enjoy it. She rarely sold her work, and her apartment was filled with paintings. She lived in Spanish Harlem and told me she was mugged one time in the elevator, but was so fascinated with one of the guys that she asked him to pose for her. This is Some Dance in the Shadows, and is 48 by 36 or by 60 inches, painted in 1985. After Alice's party, New York became a regular part of my life, going twice a year, and Some Dance in the Shadows was included in one of my first shows there at Warpole Gallery. On my first trip, I decided to take paintings with me. But when I arrived at the airport with these large cardboard boxes, I was so nervous, I left my car parked in front of the terminal and had to call my husband to come and pick it up. I even called Checker Cab before I left and asked them to measure their backseat doors to make sure they could accommodate my work. There is something very New York about this painting. It's very crowded, almost claustrophobic, and the dancers are, in fact, inside, in the shadows, just lightly touching each other. The men are attired in similar clothing, although one is more formal, like his companion in her flowered hat. They seem to be unaware that they are about to collide, while the two women in the sunshine are oblivious to it all. The one on the left, with her mismatched shoes, protects herself with her fan, and to her right is the only one who seems to be willing to play ball. The unconscious loves a metaphor. Dancing in the Shadows is pretty much a description of an artist's life, spent mostly in the studio, and the colliding figures are very familiar, like a painting developing with seemingly conflicting ideas, only to emerge a unified in the end. This painting is titled The Dance Class and is 40 by 48 inches, painted in 1998. Dancers are a familiar theme in my work and often arrive unbidden, and this time we see them assembling for a class. In the foreground, a seated figure with imperious intentions directs their activities. She reminds me of my childhood ballet teacher, Miss Araby Blinn, a no-nonsense French lady who loved the dance and made serious attempts to turn us into dancers. To no avail, I practiced furiously, but thank her now for the constant parade of dancers that populate my paintings. Something I can't quite imagine, Miss Blinn appears to be passing her crown and gesturing toward the figure on the left, who holds a wand or baton, but isn't even in proper dance attire, and furthermore seems disinterested. The other figures seem to be waiting for instructions, as if confused by the lack of leadership. And behind them, the mysterious shadows on the wall completely confuse me. I have no idea why they're there in this room high in the air with clouds floating past and a treetop visible from the window in the empty room on the right. This painting is part of the Epic Center permanent collection downtown and is displayed on the first floor. White Lies is 48 inches by 60 and painted in 1999. I researched this term after the title emerged, and it was described as the expression white lies implies a benevolent fabrication as opposed to a harmful lie. Civilized people often engage in this deception, the paradigm for which is donning elegant attire and conversing at social gatherings. White Lies is a painting about elegance and civility, the beautiful social surface of America. It questions the delicate balance between dreams and reality and reminds me of our eternal optimism, the ability to envision our lives as something more than daily existence. And it's another painting that will remain in Kalamazoo as part of KIA's permanent collection. I do remember thinking when I painted this that it was taking place on the deck of a boat, but the destination was unclear. Perhaps it just represents our journey through life. The man in the painting looks very professorial, and she is excessively demure, sitting primly listening to him. Very traditional roles. And notice that they are on slightly different planes. His chair is much more substantial and higher than hers. And I remember having a lot of trouble with her pose, the position of her feet, to the point that I made another smaller painting just to get it right. Believe me, you cannot sit this way. The pictures in the background are based on postcards my sister-in-law used to send me from Florida. My family had a long relationship with Florida, which means that Florida shows up frequently in my work. This painting is titled Carnival and is 36 by 40 inches, painted in 1982. We all know when Michigan wants us to stay home. It was winter and I had a rented van, the old rickety kind, packed with paintings, including Carnival, for my first one-person show in Chicago at the Cultural Center. After 3 tries, I finally made it out of my icy neighborhood onto I-94, only to hear halfway there that another ice storm was ahead of me. So back I went and decided to hire a truck the next day, realizing too late the trucks don't have rear view mirrors. And not knowing truck rules, I got stopped by the Chicago police for driving it on a downtown street. And that was my last truck adventure. Like the weather, Carnival seems unsettled and a bit frantic. The figures are not quite solid, even transparent in some areas, and trying unsuccessfully to hold on to each other as he charges ahead, while she demurs in her ruffled ladylike dress, wondering if this is proper behavior. And behind them, the proprietor wears an artist's apron, implying that his job is to observe society, which he is powerless to do while partially blinded by a transparent blindfold, and therefore unable to help. And on the shelf behind them, the dolls seem to represent an extension of human beings. There are actually 3, as we see a bicycle wheel behind the running man's head. Completing the picture is a strange little structure with balls in front, which might be a game. All toys and utterly powerless in this crazy, unpredictable world. This carnival atmosphere seems to represent the hectic pace of contemporary society and our frustrating attempts to traverse it. We have Donna's painting, The Alice View, 36 by 40 inches, painted in 1995. The mountains in Utah and floating tables, a very Alice view as she traverses Wonderland, moving forward only to find herself actually moving backward. My mother loved to read, and loved to read to us way past the time we could read to ourselves. So Alice is very familiar, almost like an extra sibling. This started as a garden party, which explains the tables. I photographed my young niece to be a guest while her new kitten constantly intruded, accounting for the kitten's final presence on the floating table. But as paintings will do, Kristen was replaced with grown-up figures. I remember being particularly interested in the shapes formed by their clothing, as well as adjusting to a new painting medium, liquid, which forces oil paint to dry very fast. I had developed an allergy to turpentine, part of my former traditional medium, and still the painting moved forward or backward like Alice. The mountains, familiar to me as I painted them during a trip to Utah, reminded me of the ancient past, more solid than memories and there forever. The figures in the foreground seem to be unaware of the floating tables, as well as the forgotten history behind them. My mother's picture rests on the tables as well as the miniature tribal figures dancing on the left, perhaps a reference to the couple dancing as past and present coincide. And lost in thought, the lady with the white hat, possibly a napkin blown astray, holds tightly to herself to remain upright in the face of all this ancient history, surrounding her and forever intruding upon her conscious mind. Wildflowers is 40 by 36 inches and painted in 2004. I think this is a restaurant, and Our Lady in Green is moving quickly toward the back windows with a view of the hotel rooms across the way. All players in this drama are attractive and perfectly dressed, as they usually are in my paintings, no matter what the crazy circumstances. And yes, she certainly has confused her choice of shoes, Or maybe she just couldn't decide which ones to wear on this important mission to warn her friends. The world seems to be in a state of flux. Nature has gone awry as giant flowers attempt to escape the red rug. One even landing on the floating orange tablecloth, where sprouting green plants strangely grow. But her warning comes too late. Grass is already growing on the hotel room floors, and giant flowers have appeared behind the groom and his baseball cap friend. The bride is trapped with her veil caught in the window frame, and her friend, perhaps her maid of honor, has already started to tend the plants on a floating table as more grow behind them. While painting this, I was taking breaks and watching a Judy Davis movie, A Gaudy Afternoon, named for the famous architect whose buildings have a strange plant-like character. She played a writer and translator living in Barcelona who became involved in a wild, out of control, and often comical mystery. At the end of the movie, we see her in an airport telling one of her bizarre friends that she is returning to see her mother in Kalamazoo. Dancing Class is 34 by 48 inches, painted in 2009. Painting is never just about one thing. The sad state of the economy began to intrude when I was working on a series called Wedding Book. Dancing Class, with its tippy floors and menacing surroundings, mimics uneasy America. And yet the couple dances on, hoping to learn the new steps to this complicated waltz. Dance seems a natural and graceful metaphor for human activities and often finds its way into my work, even in paintings where it is not an obvious preoccupation of the inhabitants. The slightest nuance of position or movement is significant. It speaks with a silent but clear and resonant voice, simultaneously revealing and mysterious. The Wedding Book series began in summer when my daughter was visiting, and I started to think about women and their complicated lives. Too many hats and too little time, with the world shifting and changing around them. But ideas like paintings evolve slowly over time, beneath the surface, until that perfect and unexpected moment of clarity. Like walking into the frame maker just in time to see pictures of Shannon's wedding, Larry Braithwaite's daughter, scrolling by on the computer. It was a fairly casual outdoor wedding by traditional standards, but elegant and still holding to custom. It seemed a perfect metaphor, delivered intact, to honor women as they traverse this new and unexplored territory, our present world. These are not meant to be portraits, but daily evidence of this time. The flowered room is 40 by 36 inches and painted in 2007. Sitting quietly and lost in thought, the bride and her new husband are surrounded by flowers, dense, like paintings by Edward Villard. This is not part of my Wedding Book series, but it is a reference to my niece Chrissy's wedding. In another room, the music is playing and the guests are dancing, but they have found a silent moment just for themselves. The flowered room was sold to a couple from Chicago to be delivered by one of the gallery directors who had a condominium there. Thinking it would be safe in her secure parking garage, she left it overnight in her car, only to find it gone in the morning. So you guessed it, I was asked to create a copy. A difficult task, but I wanted to please the client. I had a picture and had completed it recently enough so that mixing the colors was not a huge problem. Nevertheless, I don't recommend it. It can never measure up to the original. Return of the Angel is 28 by 39 inches, painted in 1991. And this was not my only foray into copying myself. Believe it or not, UPS lost this painting, Return of the Angel, packed in a large wooden crate on its way to a client in DC. Now, I still imagine it out there somewhere just waiting to be found. And my neighbor's beautiful white cat is just a preview of the next painting. Catwalkers is 36 by 40 inches, painted in 1993. My neighbor's cat used to wander over and spend the day with me. And before I found out I was allergic to him, he had inspired a whole series of paintings. But I think this is one of the strangest, Walking Cats in the Desert, where he doesn't make an appearance, but only acts as my muse. The models for this painting were my ever-patient husband and my assistant Anne, who posed not with a cat, but with large cat-sized watering cans. And my son's cat, Liza, named for Liza Minnelli. The other models are, on the left in the background, an alabaster ointment jar from King Tut's tomb, which I fell in love with after seeing the exhibition. Mainly, I think, because he is sort of childlike and funny with his tongue sticking out. The other on the right is a Chinese foo dog, a protector of the household, who is equally comical in a pseudo-fierce way. But the other human, the foreground figure, completely escapes me. So we start out with an improbable premise, something that reminds me of the saying, like herding cats. Since cats were my inspiration that year, perhaps I was trying to protect them or what they represented from the desert where very little grows. The creative process is something that always needs to be protected because it's very elusive and can easily disappear like writer's block. So it is best to worship the cats like the Egyptians did and protect them with the help of the fierce little foo dog. Storybook Bride is 28 by, I'm on the wrong thing. There. Storybook Bride is 28 by 34 inches and was painted in 2003. This is a slightly altered view of one of my favorite places, the library. My branch library in Ashtamo looks like a postmodern fairy tale castle. The enchanting structure achieves the architect's stated goal to create a facility that appears vast, ancient, and romantic, a mythical walled complex. When other cities were closing libraries, Kalamazoo was building more, winning the 2002 Gale Library of the Year award. This painting started with Horn Ashby, my New York gallery at the time, deciding to do a show with books as the theme. And since I never seemed to do anything straight on, I headed for the library to take pictures of people going in and out. There weren't many because it was a windy, rainy day, as you can see from the little girls blowing hair, and I'm sure I must have changed their dresses. Now we also see an insistent bride who completely surprised me and was a problem from the beginning, looking nothing like the figures I usually paint. Finally, I realized why. She looked exactly like my friend, whose son was part of the architectural firm who designed the libraries. Proving what I've always known, but don't always follow, that you have to let go and listen to the part of yourself that makes the pictures, not the words telling you what you should do. This painting is part of the library's permanent collection and is on display at the Ashtamo Branch Library. War Games is 34 by 40 inches, painted in 1991. Although babies are an unlikely subject when you think about war, they represented to me the vulnerability of civilians. This was painted at the time of the first Gulf War, when Iraq invaded and annexed Kuwait. A declared war was very alarming, and there was no way of knowing that it would last just a little over 6 months. Because I always use models when I paint, I chose the babies I was most familiar with, along with a few I'm not too sure about. But starting at the left is my daughter Mary, and behind her, my brother John. In the center is my friend Karen's daughter, Dana, and next to her, my son David. I guess the rest will have to be considered generic babies, because I don't remember who they are. Sorry, babies. The babies are seated on 2 American flags. The largest one underneath is faded and represents the past. And even though the one on top is brighter, it's still transparent because the present day will always be influenced by what has happened in the past. And the baby's vulnerability is total because they are completely unaware that their toys have turned lethal. This painting was included in the West Art and the Law 20th anniversary show, sponsored by West Publishing, representing the idea of protecting the vulnerable, and traveled throughout the US before it was purchased by a Harvard professor who wanted to use it as the cover for her new book, but unfortunately her publisher didn't agree. Phantoms is 36 by 28 inches and was painted in 1986. Some of you may recognize this as the cover of ARTbeak's Painting and Poetry. Several years ago, I met a wonderful poet, Elizabeth Kurlikowski, who also liked my work, and we began a long collaboration, finally resulting in this book. It evolved slowly as I emailed photos of my paintings for Elizabeth to use as inspiration for her work, and Alice seemed the perfect model to represent both of us. My inspiration and real model for this painting was Anne Conroy's daughter, Nancy, who was a perfect Alice. A group of us used to hire a model and paint on the deck off my studio, and this time it was Nancy. I always use models of some sort, usually from pictures I now find on the internet after years of painting and drawing from life. The Alice in this painting, looking thoughtful, seems to be caught in another adventure, trapped in a gray underground room like a bomb shelter. Even the usually glorious flamingos parading in front of her have lost their color, poor things. Flamingos are so over the top and spectacular that they usually make us smile. So it looks like there's not even any humor in Alice's world. But Alice always displays a kind of wisdom when confronted with a bizarre situation. And after all, she does possess the only really color in the room. So I think our determined heroine will find a solution. Like in real life, we all encounter problems that have to be solved. Her Magic Bouquet is a digital print. The paper size is 24 by 24 inches, and the image size is 17.5 by 17.5, created in 2020. When the pandemic began, my ability to paint completely shut down, but thankfully, Alice was there to assist me. I knew she would be the only one to understand this topsy-turvy world, so I decided to ask her to help me create a print. Since she prevailed over so many untoward perils while traveling through Wonderland, I imagined a sprinkle of her acquired wisdom delivered gently by a bird and floating down just in time to bring calm to these troubling times. Her magic bouquet was created on a field of light, my computer, an irresistible surface for a painter. The color is simply gorgeous. And with the help of a graphics program like Photoshop, images can be created by all imaginable means and proofed and experimented with endlessly, until, like a painting, they match that invisible picture in my head. Think of a collage where every element can change color and be cut, pasted, rendered transparent, made bigger or smaller, and darker or lighter, like a painting, but in some ways more difficult. If I change my mind and want a figure to walk instead of run, well, you can see the problem. On the other hand, creating pattern is undeniably easier and more fun. The pattern in her magic bouquet was created with 2 patterns found on the internet, layered and transparent. The colors changed and lightened, and the bird on the upper right is taken from one pattern and the flowers from another, and not to be forgotten, the tiny butterfly above Alice's head. It's a Jungle is a digital print. Paper size is 24 by 30 inches, and image size is 20 by 26, created in 2020. The pandemic continues and deepens. Mother Nature is relentless. The population is stunned in response to the tragic circumstances they live with and are helpless to control, as if a jungle encroaches upon them, fulfilling its duty to eradicate all in its path. Their minds follow a familiar trail of anxiety, hope, anger, courage, fright, panic, and on, too much to absorb in one giant instant, yet impossible to ignore. Her Sister's Party is another digital print. Paper size is 24 by 30 inches, and image size 18 by 24, and was created in 2020. And the pandemic continues, deeper and denser as more people die, over 1 million now in the US alone. So I imagined a crowded party where the guests are being absorbed unknowingly into the patterned atmosphere. And although some are trying to escape, most are quite unaware of their peril. The pandemic world, like a game of cards, carelessly selects each player to win or lose, but all must stay until the party ends. And each figure has its own role to play. For instance, the woman with the backless dress in the foreground changed so often as the print evolved that I doubt if there is a single part of the original figure remaining. And the little boy, who is still having fun, eventually doubled himself, or maybe he's getting closer to escaping, as he seems to have lost his ball to the right foreground. While in another room, silently arranged against the walls, Miro and Goya watch over us, as if recording all these moments in time and reminding us that indeed we do survive to win the game, with wisdom enough to play again. 9 months later, I finally returned to my studio to paint again. Clearly, one cannot continue to grieve for the world. As the song says, what will be, will be. The end. Thank you very much. I think we have time for some questions, if anybody has questions. You go ahead and choose.
Yeah, I had 2 questions. First of all, do you visualize all of these paintings ahead of time, the concept?
No.
I'm gonna repeat the question very quickly.
Yeah, sorry.
Do you visualize these paintings ahead of time?
No, what happens is usually something catches my attention, something that sparks an image to start with. And I start with, maybe I'll start with one figure, and then as I go along, it evolves over a period of time. And eventually makes sense for some reason.
And my other question was, I was very curious about your painting with the babies, and that those were the only ones where the figures' heads were cut off at the top.
In the painting War Games with the babies.
Right.
Sam is curious because it's the only painting where the figures' heads were cut off at the top.
Oh, I have no idea. Let me look at that again and see. It probably, oh, I see what you mean. I don't know. I guess in a sense, if you cut part of the figure off, it means that it is extending on and on into space, that there's more happening that you're not seeing. Thank you for asking that. I never thought about it.
Have you had much involvement with the French Impressionists?
With the what process?
French Impressionists?
Have you had much involvement with the French Impressionists?
Oh, well, only to admire their work. I do admire their work, and I've seen them many times in art history classes, and I have some favorites.
Other ARTbreaks?
Say it again, sorry.
Other ARTbreaks?
Oh, like other art breaks?
Pardon?
Things in other art breaks, like hearing about it in other art breaks, I think.
Have I done another art break?
I think he's just talking about, are you talking about like seeing about the French Impressionists during an art break?
Yeah, previously.
Yes, previously. Have you come to see an art break on French Impressionism here?
Oh, here at the KIA. No, I don't think I have, but I spend a lot of time looking at them.
You talk about uniting diverse elements, and that often happens towards the end of the painting. So in that process, you talk about the unconscious. Do you also have any writing that you do in order to resolve the questions you have about, does this guy get a mask? Does he not get a mask? How does that, it all comes at the end. So how does it come to happen?
So as you're making your painting and you have various diverse elements and you're wandering through things, do you also do any writing to help you figure out what is happening in your painting and what is the process and where you are going? Is that correct?
The process of using words or writing to understand a painting is something totally separate from the painting, which is something that I needed to do when I had to talk about the work for the book that was published. For some reason that works to take me back into the painting and leads me to what I was thinking of. In the painting process, I will sometimes take a picture of the painting, take it down to my computer, and see if I can figure out something that way, just to get a different perspective, because you do certainly reach times when you don't know what to do next, and you just have to, but I haven't tried to write anything to figure that out.
Mary, do you sometimes consciously draw on dreams from your unconscious? That's question number one. Number two, you mentioned how much you admire the surrealism exhibit. is that a label that sometimes applies to at least some of your work?
Okay, I'm gonna give them to you separately. The first question is, do you sometimes create art based on your unconscious dreams while you are conscious? So do you have a dream and have a vision that comes to you and then you make art later?
No, I don't base work on dreams. I think that's what he's asking, right? Because a dream is already an interpretation of something that's happened to you. By the time it gets into your conscious mind, it's not unconscious anymore. So no, I don't. And the other part was?
The second question is that your work, Too Many Hats, is in the Surrealist exhibition.
No, I claim not to have anything to do with surrealism. Even though it fits in with the show, but I'm sure a lot of the people in the show don't consider themselves surrealists either. That was a very particular movement that I didn't find that interesting. I mean, I think they were trying to do something, but it always looks a little bit phony to me for some reason.
As a young artist, where did you train and how were there certain artists that you worked with?
When you were a young artist, where did you train and were there certain artists that you worked with?
Certain artists that what?
You worked with, like perhaps that mentored you or studied with?
Well, I mean, I was an art major in college. The only artist that I really studied with was Harvey Breverman. There is some of his work here, but I haven't seen it recently. He was a wonderful artist and a wonderful teacher. He was here for 3 workshops, 3 years in a row. So he was a big influence on me. But mainly, I just kept painting. I used to go out in my car, find some place that's interesting and paint. I did that for a long time. It's a good way to learn how to paint. So artists have influenced me, but not because I've studied with them for the most part.
All the people in your paintings are well dressed, sometimes very formally dressed. Was that a decision you made early on? How did you happen to get into that?
All of the people in your paintings are well dressed. Sometimes they're very formally dressed. And how did you decide to put your characters, your figures in these kinds of outfits?
Actually, they decided that. I didn't decide. I don't know why, but I'm aware of the fact that my figures are always well dressed, and it wasn't a conscious decision. It's just that, it turned out that way. When you paint, something happens, and you look, and that's right or wrong. So I guess I'm just interested in well-dressed people. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. To tell you the truth, I was kind of worried that I would just be talking to 2 people because of the pandemic, so thank you for coming.